50 armed men don't just show up at your door by accident. They come for blood, for justice, or for revenge. And Caleb Stone was about to find out which one it was. But to understand how a former lawman ended up standing between a corrupt sheriff and an outlaw's son, we need to go back 24 hours, back to when everything changed. The Colorado sun was merciless that September morning in 1887. Caleb Stone had been working his ranch just outside Gunnison for 3 years now, ever since he'd turned in his marshal's badge and walked away from the law. At 42, he'd seen enough corruption, enough innocent blood spilled in the name of justice, to last him several lifetimes. He was mending fence posts on the eastern edge of his property, about a mile from his cabin, when he saw the boy. At first, it was just movement in the distance, a small figure stumbling through the scrub brush like a drunk trying to find his way home. But as Caleb squinted against the glare, he realized it was a child, and the child was hurt. Caleb dropped his tools and started walking, then jogging, then running. The closer he got, the worse it looked. The boy couldn't have been more than 9 years old, wearing dusty clothes that had once been fine but were now torn and blood-stained. His face was scratched up from thorns, his lips cracked from dehydration, and he was favoring his left leg badly. When the boy saw Caleb approaching, fear flashed across his young face. He tried to run, stumbled, and went down hard. By the time Caleb reached him, the kid was trying to crawl away, whimpering like a wounded animal. "Easy, son," Caleb said, keeping his voice low and steady. "I'm not going to hurt you. You're hurt bad. Let me help." The boy's eyes were wide with terror and something else. Recognition, maybe, or calculation. He was deciding whether to trust this stranger or die trying to escape him. "Please," the boy finally whispered, his voice raw. "They're coming. They're going to kill me." Caleb felt his blood run cold. "Who's coming?" But the boy had already passed out. Caleb scooped him up, couldn't have weighed more than 60 pounds, and headed back to his cabin at a dead run. As he moved, he examined the boy more closely. The blood on his shirt wasn't from the scratches. There was a graze wound on his left side like a bullet had clipped him, fresh, maybe a few hours old, and his leg was twisted at an angle that suggested he'd fallen from something high. A horse, probably. Inside the cabin, Caleb laid the boy on his bed and went to work. He'd patched up enough men in his years as a lawman to know what needed doing. The bullet wound was superficial, painful, but not dangerous. The leg wasn't broken, just badly sprained. The real danger was dehydration and shock. As Caleb cleaned and bandaged the wounds, the boy stirred and opened his eyes. For a moment, they just looked at each other. Then the boy spoke. "You were a lawman," he said. It wasn't a question. Caleb paused. "How'd you know that?" "The way you move, the way you checked me for weapons before you started helping. My pa taught me to notice things like that." The boy's voice was surprisingly steady for someone so young and hurt. "You going to turn me in?" "Turn you in for what?" The boy's jaw tightened. "For being Jesse Garrett." The name hit Caleb like a fist to the gut. Garrett, the Garrett Brothers Gang, one of the most wanted outlaw groups in Colorado. And this boy was claiming to be the son of Cole Garrett, the gang's leader. But Caleb knew something that most people didn't. He knew how the Garrett brothers had become outlaws in the first place, because he'd been there 6 years ago when it happened. It had been 1881, and Caleb was still wearing a marshal's badge. The Garrett brothers, Cole, Marcus, and Thomas, had been honest ranchers trying to make a living in the Gunnison Valley. Then the railroad came through, and with it came Sheriff Wade Dockery and his schemes. Dockery wanted the Garrett ranch for a railroad man who'd paid him well. When the Garretts refused to sell, mysterious things started happening. Cattle poisoned, barns burned. Then, one night, a railroad payroll was robbed and 3 men were killed. Dockery found evidence on Garrett property, a bag of marked bills and a bloody shirt. He arrested all 3 brothers for murder and robbery. The trial was a sham. Caleb had tried to speak up, tried to point out the inconsistencies in the evidence, but he'd been shut down by the judge, another man in Dockery's pocket. The night before the Garretts were set to hang, they'd broken out of jail, killed 2 deputies in the process, and fled into the high country. That's when they'd stopped being innocent men fighting a corrupt system and started being actual outlaws. Caleb had quit 2 weeks later, turned in his badge, and bought this remote ranch with what money he'd saved. He'd told himself he was done with the law, done with the corruption, done with watching innocent men turned into criminals by a system that was supposed to protect them. And now the son of one of those men was lying in his bed, looking at him with eyes too old for a 9-year-old face. "I'm not turning you in," Caleb said quietly, "but I need to know what happened. How'd you get shot? Where's your father?" Jesse's face crumpled. "There was a robbery in Crested Butte, a bank job. I wasn't supposed to be there. I snuck into the wagon before they left because I wanted to prove I could help. Pa always said I was too young, too soft. I wanted to show him I could be useful. What went wrong? It was a trap. Dockery's men were waiting. They knew we were coming. Somebody must have talked." Jesse's voice shook. "Pa and my uncles, they got away, but barely. In the chaos, I fell off the wagon, scraped along the ground. Bullet got me. When I looked up, they were already gone. Too much shooting, too much confusion. They probably think I'm dead." Caleb felt something cold settle in his stomach. "Dockery knows about you?" Jesse nodded miserably. "He saw me. Right before I fell. I heard him yelling to his men to catch the boy alive, to use me to draw out my pa. That's when Caleb heard the horses, multiple horses, coming fast. He moved to the window and felt his heart sink. At least a dozen riders, and at the head of the group was a man Caleb recognized even from a distance. Sheriff Wade Dockery, looking exactly as corrupt and mean as he had 6 years ago. Caleb turned back to Jesse. "Get under the bed. Don't make a sound. Don't come out no matter what you hear. Understand?" Jesse nodded and scrambled under the bed. Caleb checked his rifle, then thought better of it. He left the gun on the wall and stepped outside with his hands visible. Dockery reined in his horse about 20 feet from the cabin. He'd put on weight since Caleb had seen him last, and his face had the florid, puffy look of a man who drank too much, but his eyes were still sharp and mean. "Well, well," Dockery said, a nasty smile spreading across his face. "If it isn't Marshal Caleb Stone, or should I say former Marshal, heard you quit after that unfortunate business with the Garretts. Couldn't stomach real justice, could you? What do you want, Dockery?" "Hunting outlaws. The Garrett gang robbed a bank in Socorro yesterday, killed 2 men, and we got reason to believe one of them headed this direction." Dockery's eyes scanned the property. "You seen anyone suspicious?" Caleb kept his face neutral. "Been working my fence line all morning. Haven't seen anybody." "Mind if we search your cabin?" "Just to be thorough." "I do mind, actually. This is my property, and you've got no warrant." Dockery's smile vanished. "I don't need a warrant when I'm in pursuit of known criminals. Now, step aside, Stone, or I'll add obstruction to your list of problems." Behind Dockery, Caleb recognized some of the faces in the posse. Local ranchers, a few townsfolk, even some men he'd ridden with back in his marshal days. But he also saw mercenaries and guns for hire, men who'd do whatever Dockery paid them to do. "The Garretts didn't rob that payroll 6 years ago," Caleb said quietly. "You framed them, and we both know it." Dockery's face darkened. "That's a serious accusation, Stone, especially from a man who's currently harboring a fugitive." "I'm not harboring anybody." "Then you won't mind proving it." Before Caleb could respond, one of Dockery's men, a young deputy Caleb didn't recognize, spoke up. "Sheriff, there's fresh blood on the porch step." Leading inside, Dockery's smile returned. "Blood, Stone? Thought you said you hadn't seen anyone." Caleb's mind raced. "Cut myself mending fence. Got a nasty splinter." "Show me your hands." Caleb held them up. They were work-roughened and scarred from years of manual labor, but there were no fresh cuts. Dockery's eyes gleamed with triumph. "Search the cabin," he ordered. 3 men dismounted and moved toward the door. Caleb stepped in front of it. "I'm asking you not to do this, Dockery. You want the Garretts? Go after the Garretts. Don't bring whatever vendetta you got into my home. Move aside, Stone. This is your last warning." Caleb didn't move. One of the men reached for his gun. That's when another rider came thundering up, an older man Caleb recognized, Pete Morrison, who owned the ranch neighboring his. Pete had always been fair-minded, one of the few locals Caleb respected. "Hold on, Sheriff," Pete called out, breathing hard. "What's all this about?" "None of your concern, Morrison. Official law business. It's my concern when you're about to bust into my neighbor's home without proper cause." Pete looked at Caleb. "What's going on?" "Sheriff thinks I'm hiding someone," Caleb said carefully. "I'm not." Pete studied both men, then looked at Dockery. "You got evidence?" "Real evidence, not just suspicion. There's blood on his porch, and the Garrett boy was last seen heading this direction." "The Garrett boy?" Pete's expression changed. "You mean Cole Garrett's son? The child? That child is the spawn of murderers and thieves, and if Stone's hiding him, he's as guilty as they are." Pete's jaw tightened. "Even if that boy is here, and I'm not saying he is, he's still a child. What exactly are you planning to do with him, Sheriff?" "Use him to bring in his father and uncles. They'll trade themselves for the boy." "And then what? You hang the boy, too?" Dockery's silence was answer enough. Caleb felt something shift in the air. Pete wasn't the only one uncomfortable now. Several men in the posse were shifting in their saddles, exchanging glances. Hanging outlaws was one thing. Using a child as bait and then hanging him too, that was something else entirely. "This is wrong, Dockery," Pete said, "and you know it. What I know is that you're interfering with the law, Morrison. Now back off before I have you arrested too." That's when Caleb made his decision, the one that would change everything. "The boy's inside," he said quietly. "He's hurt, scared, and 9 years old, and I'm not letting you use him as bait for a trap." The silence that followed was absolute. Even Dockery seemed surprised by Caleb's admission. "You're confessing to harboring a fugitive?" "I'm confessing to helping a wounded child. There's a difference. Not in the eyes of the law. Your law, maybe, not mine." Dockery's hand moved to his gun. "You're under arrest, Stone, and I'm taking that boy." "No," Caleb said, "you're not." Suddenly, every gun in the posse was pointed at Caleb. 20 weapons, all trained on one unarmed man standing on his own porch. The odds couldn't have been worse. But Caleb had spent 20 years as a lawman. He knew men, and he could see the doubt in their faces. These weren't all mercenaries. Some of them were decent people who'd signed up to catch outlaws, not to hang children. "Any of you got kids?" Caleb called out to the posse. "Anyone here a father?" A few hands lowered slightly. Not much, but enough to notice. "That boy in there lost his mother when he was 5. Cholera took her. His father might be an outlaw, but he's still his father, the only family he's got left. And right now, that boy is terrified, hurt, and alone." Caleb's voice grew stronger. "I was a marshal for 20 years. I've hunted outlaws, brought in killers, done my duty to the law, but I've also seen what happens when the law becomes more about revenge than justice. When we start treating children like criminals just because of who their parents are." "Enough," Dockery snapped. "You men have your orders. Take Stone into custody and bring me that boy." No one moved. "I said take him." Pete Morrison spoke up. "I'm not doing this, Wade." "Arresting Caleb Stone for helping a hurt child? That's not justice. That's murder dressed up in a badge." One by one, several other men lowered their guns. Not all of them. Dockery still had plenty of loyalists, but enough to matter. Dockery's face turned purple with rage. "You're all fired. Every one of you who won't follow orders." "Can't fire volunteers," someone called out. That's when they heard the sound. Distant, but unmistakable. More horses. A lot more horses. Coming fast from the north. Caleb's heart sank as he recognized what was about to happen. The Garrett brothers had found their son, and they were bringing their entire gang with them. What happened next would be written about in newspapers for years. The standoff at Stone's Ranch, they called it. But the reporters got it wrong. They always did. 20 riders appeared on the horizon, spreading out in a wide line. Cole Garrett rode in the center, and even from a distance, Caleb could see the fury radiating off him. These weren't men coming to negotiate. They were coming for their blood. Dockery's posse immediately reoriented, guns now pointing toward the approaching outlaws. Caleb found himself in the middle of 2 groups of armed men, both ready to kill. The Garrett gang stopped about 100 yards out. Cole Garrett dismounted and walked forward alone, his hands away from his guns but his face promising violence. "Stone," he called out. His voice carried across the distance. "I don't know you, and you don't know me. But that's my boy in there, and I'm taking him home." "Your boy's safe," Caleb called back. "He's hurt, but he'll live." "Then bring him out." "Can't do that, not with Dockery here." For the first time, Cole seemed to really look at the sheriff. Recognition and hatred twisted his features. "Dockery. Should have known you'd be involved. You framed us 6 years ago, turned us into killers, and now you want my son?" "I want justice, Garrett, for the men you've killed, the people you've robbed." "Justice?" Cole's laugh was bitter. "You don't know the meaning of the word. You murdered my wife with your schemes, destroyed my family, turned my brothers and me into the very thing you claimed we were." He took another step forward. "And now you want my boy. The only thing I've got left worth living for. Should have thought of that before you became an outlaw. You made me an outlaw." The two groups were close enough now that Caleb could see individual faces. Cole Garrett looked nothing like the honest rancher Caleb had known 6 years ago. This man was weathered, scarred, and carrying the weight of violence in every line of his body. But his eyes still had that same desperate quality they'd had in the courtroom when he'd begged someone, anyone, to believe him. Caleb made a decision that surprised even himself. He stepped off his porch and walked to the middle ground between the two groups. 20 guns from the posse, 20 guns from the gang, all pointing at each other, and Caleb Stone standing right in the middle. "I know what happened 6 years ago," Caleb said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "I was there. I was the marshal who tried to speak up for the Garretts when Dockery framed them. I saw the evidence planted. I saw the witnesses bribed. I watched 3 innocent men get sentenced to hang for a crime they didn't commit." "Lies," Dockery hissed. "Every word is lies." "Then why did I quit?" Caleb turned to face the sheriff. "Why would I walk away from 20 years of law enforcement if I didn't believe the system was broken? Why would I risk everything standing here right now if I didn't believe these men were wronged?" Murmurs rippled through the posse. Some of these men had known Caleb as a lawman. They knew his reputation, and they were starting to question what they'd been told. "The Garretts didn't start as outlaws," Caleb continued. "They were made into outlaws by a corrupt sheriff who wanted their land. Everything they've done since, every robbery, every crime, that blood is on Dockery's hands. He created them." "I've heard enough of this," Dockery started, but Pete Morrison cut him off. "I want to hear the rest. Keep talking, Caleb. There's not much more to say, except that Jesse Garrett is 9 years old. He snuck along on a robbery because he wanted to prove himself to his father. He got shot, got left behind, and stumbled onto my property half dead. I helped him because that's what decent people do. And now I'm standing here telling you all that whatever you think about outlaws and justice and the law, that boy in there is innocent. He's a child, and I'll be damned if I let him be used as bait or hanged for his father's crimes." The silence that followed felt like the entire world holding its breath. Then Cole Garrett did something unexpected. He removed his gun belt and dropped it on the ground. "You're right," he said to Caleb. "Jesse's innocent, more innocent than any of us, and I won't have him dragged into this war." He looked at his men. "Stand down." One by one, the gang members lowered their weapons, not holstering them. They weren't fools, but pointing them at the ground instead of at the posse. "Your turn, Dockery," Caleb said. "Like hell. These men are wanted criminals. I'm arresting them all." "On what charges?" "Defending their boy." "They're outlaws. They were made outlaws by you, and everyone here knows it now." Pete Morrison spoke up. "I knew there was something fishy about that trial 6 years ago. Never sat right with me. And if Caleb Stone says you framed them, I believe him." Other voices joined in. Not all of them. Dockery still had supporters, but enough to matter. Enough that the posse was starting to fracture. That's when Jesse appeared in the cabin doorway. The boy was pale, leaning against the doorframe for support, but his eyes found his father immediately. "Pa?" His voice was small, uncertain. Cole's face transformed. All the hardness, all the rage melted away. He looked like what he'd once been, a father who loved his son. Jesse. Oh God, Jesse, I thought you were dead. Jesse took a hesitant step forward, then another. Then he was running, limping, really, but moving as fast as his injured leg would allow. Cole met him halfway, dropping to his knees and wrapping his arms around his son. The sight of that reunion, outlaw father and innocent son, affected the posse more than any of Caleb's words could have. These were men with families, men with sons, and they were watching a father hold his child like it was the last time he'd ever get the chance, because it might be. "Pa, I'm sorry," Jesse sobbed. "I'm sorry I snuck along. I'm sorry I messed everything up." "Shh. No, son. Number. You didn't mess anything up. I should have kept you safer. Should have made sure you couldn't follow." Cole looked up at Dockery with murder in his eyes. "But at least now I know what kind of man would use a child as bait." Several men in the posse looked uncomfortable. One of them, a young farmer Caleb recognized from town, actually holstered his gun and backed his horse away. "This isn't right, Sheriff," the farmer said. "I signed up to catch outlaws, not to hang children." "That boy isn't being hanged," Dockery snapped. "He's leverage. We bring in the Garretts, return the boy to relatives or something." "He's got no other relatives," Cole said. "His mother's dead. My brothers are all he's got for uncles. You take us in, you take everything from him. Should have thought of that before you broke the law." "You made us break the law," Cole's voice rose. "You framed us, tried to hang us, stole our land, destroyed our lives. Everything we've done since then is on you. Every crime, every dollar stolen. That's you, Dockery. You did this, and now you want to take my son to finish what you started 6 years ago." The truth of it hung in the air. Even Dockery's most loyal supporters looked uncertain now. Caleb saw his chance. "There's another way," he said. "A way where nobody else has to die today." "I'm listening," Cole said warily. "You and your brothers turn yourselves in. Real trial this time with real judges. I'll testify about what happened 6 years ago. Pete Morrison will testify. Half this posse will testify if they're honest men. With the right people paying attention, you might actually get a fair hearing. And if we don't, if you don't, then you keep running. Keep robbing. Keep killing when you have to. And one day, maybe next month, maybe next year, someone faster or luckier will put you down, and Jesse will grow up knowing his father died on the run like an animal." Caleb paused. "Or worse, he'll grow up to be just like you. Another outlaw, another wanted man. That the legacy you want for him?" Cole's face was anguished. He looked at his son, then at his brothers who'd ridden up beside him. Marcus and Thomas Garrett, both younger than Cole, both carrying the same weathered, desperate look. "We go to trial. They'll hang us," Marcus said quietly. "You know they will." "Maybe," Caleb admitted, "but maybe not. With the right testimony, with the truth finally coming out, maybe you get prison instead of the noose. Maybe you serve your time and get to see your son again in 10 years instead of dying on the run tomorrow. That's not much of a choice. It's better than the one you've got now." Thomas Garrett spoke up for the first time. "What about Jesse? Who takes care of him while we're in prison?" Everyone looked at Caleb. He felt the weight of what was being asked. Taking in the son of outlaws, raising a boy who'd grow up knowing his father was in prison because of his testimony. But when Caleb looked at Jesse, this scared, hurt 9-year-old who'd done nothing wrong except be born to the wrong family, he knew what he had to say. "I'll take him. Raise him right. Make sure he gets schooling, learns a trade. Make sure he knows his father wasn't a monster, just a man who got dealt a bad hand." "Why would you do that?" Cole asked. "You don't know us. Don't owe us anything. Because someone needs to break this cycle. Someone needs to prove that justice can be more than revenge dressed up in a badge, and because that boy deserves better than what he's gotten so far." Cole looked at his son for a long moment. Then he pulled Jesse close and whispered something in his ear. Jesse nodded, tears streaming down his face. "All right," Cole said, standing up. "We'll do it your way, Stone. We'll stand trial, tell the truth, face whatever comes." He looked at Dockery. "But if anything happens to my son, if one hair on his head gets hurt, I swear on my wife's grave I'll find a way to make you pay. Prison walls won't stop me. The noose won't stop me. I'll haunt you from beyond the grave if I have to." The threat was delivered calmly, matter-of-factly, and that made it all the more terrifying. Dockery seemed to shrink under that gaze. He looked around at his posse, at the men who were now openly questioning him, and seemed to realize he'd lost control of the situation. "Fine," he said through gritted teeth, "but the Garretts are my prisoners. I'm taking them to Denver for trial." "We'll all go," Pete Morrison said firmly. "Everyone here who wants to see real justice done will ride with you to Denver. Make sure these men get a fair shake this time." Dockery looked like he wanted to argue, but he was outnumbered and he knew it. He gave a curt nod. The next few minutes were a flurry of activity. The Garrett brothers formally surrendered, handing over their weapons. Cole knelt down one more time to say goodbye to Jesse. "You be good for Mr. Stone," he said, his voice thick. "Study hard. Learn everything you can. And remember, your ma and I loved you more than anything in this world. What happened to us, that's not your fault. You hear me? None of this is your fault." Jesse clung to his father, sobbing. "I don't want you to go." "I know, son. But this is how it has to be. At least now I know you're safe. That's more than I had before." They held each other for another long moment. Then Cole gently pulled away, kissed his son's forehead, and stood up. As the posse prepared to ride out with their prisoners, Pete Morrison rode over to Caleb. "You sure you know what you're taking on?" Pete asked quietly. "Raising that boy won't be easy. Folks will talk. Some will never accept him." "I know," Caleb said, "but it's the right thing to do. For what it's worth, I think you're a good man, Caleb Stone. Better than most." They shook hands. Then the posse rode out, the three Garrett brothers in chains but riding with their heads high. Cole looked back once, catching Jesse's eye. Then they were gone, disappearing into the dust and distance. Caleb and Jesse stood on the porch, watching until they couldn't see the riders anymore. "What happens now?" Jesse asked quietly. "Now we figure out how to live," Caleb said, "and we wait to see what justice looks like when honest men are finally in charge of it." The trial of the Garrett brothers lasted 3 weeks and became one of the most talked about cases in Colorado. Caleb Stone testified for 2 days, laying out everything he'd witnessed 6 years earlier. Pete Morrison testified. Even some of Dockery's former deputies came forward, unable to stay silent any longer. The evidence of corruption was overwhelming. Dockery was arrested and charged with fraud, conspiracy, and accessory to murder. He died in prison 2 years later, still proclaiming his innocence. As for the Garrett brothers, the jury found them guilty of robbery and manslaughter, but not murder. They acknowledged the circumstances that had driven the men to crime. The judge sentenced them to 15 years in the state prison, with possibility of parole after 10. Cole Garrett served 12 years. His brothers served 11. When they walked out of prison in 1899, Jesse was 21 years old and working as Caleb Stone's foreman on the ranch that had become his home. The reunion between father and son was everything Caleb had hoped for. Cole was older, grayer, weathered by 12 years of hard labor, breaking rocks and working the prison quarry, but his eyes were clear and his handshake was firm. Prison hadn't broken him. It had given him time to think, to understand what he'd lost and what he still had to fight for. He never returned to crime. Neither did his brothers. They worked honest jobs, rebuilt their reputations one day at a time, and eventually Marcus even became a deputy sheriff in a small town in Arizona. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Jesse grew up to be a good man, educated, principled, and dedicated to helping other children who'd been caught in the circumstances beyond their control. He became a school teacher, then a judge, and he never forgot the lesson he'd learned that day at Stone's Ranch, that justice and revenge weren't the same thing, and that sometimes the bravest thing you could do was choose mercy over vengeance. Caleb Stone lived another 30 years. He never remarried, but he became a father figure to dozens of young men in the Gunnison Valley who needed guidance. Jesse wasn't the only one he took in over the years. There were others, orphans, runaways, kids who'd made mistakes and needed a second chance. The ranch became known as a place where lost boys could find their way home. When Caleb died in 1917 at the age of 72, his funeral was attended by over 200 people. Former outlaws and lawmen stood side by side, rich men and poor men, people of every background and belief united by one simple fact. Caleb Stone had taught them what real justice looked like. Jesse Garrett gave the eulogy. He spoke about the day a former marshal chose to help an outlaw's son instead of looking the other way. He spoke about how one man's decision to do the right thing, even when it was hard, even when it was dangerous, had changed the course of multiple lives. Mr. Stone used to tell me that there were two kinds of justice in this world, Jesse said. The kind that comes from fear and revenge, and the kind that comes from understanding and mercy. He said the first kind might make you feel powerful for a moment, but the second kind could change the world. Jesse paused, looking out at the crowd. He changed my world. He changed my father's world. He changed all of our worlds, and the ripples of that choice, one man choosing to help a hurt child instead of turning him away, those ripples are still spreading today. The lesson was simple but profound. Sometimes the smallest acts of mercy can prevent the greatest tragedies. Sometimes choosing understanding over revenge, compassion over judgment, can break cycles that have lasted generations. Cole Garrett lived to be 68, dying peacefully in his sleep in 1921. His last words to Jesse were, "Tell Caleb Stone I said thank you. Tell him I'll see him on the other side and the drinks are on me." If you enjoyed this story of courage, redemption, and the true meaning of justice, hit that subscribe button. Because there are so many more stories like this one, tales of ordinary people who made extraordinary choices and changed history in ways they never imagined. Now, click on that video right there to hear about another moment when one person's decision to do the right thing altered the course of countless lives. Trust me, you won't want to miss it.